All right, we're going to move on because the clock says to. So the next section is about gathering data. All right, so gathering data is the phase. So now we've all come together and we've had fun. We've done an icebreaker. We've got our brains thinking. Hopefully, everybody's smiling at this point. Please let your team smile. Help them smile. Have fun. So now we're having fun. We're in gather data. So now we switch over into work mode. And so the first question is really, hey, what are we going to talk about? And don't ask your team that. Don't say to your team, hey, what are we going to talk about? Guide them through thinking about things that they can talk about. There's a never ending pool of things that you can talk about. Guide them through it. So, how do we do that? Top row right there. Define the scope. Don't let the team talk about things that happened 3 years ago in a retrospective. That's not going to help you today. Don't let the team talk about the VP's new car. That's not going to help you in your next iteration, right? What you want to do is define the scope. Here is what we're here to talk about. Let's talk about this scope together. So define that scope and don't get lost. Don't let the team wander here and there. Hey guys, let's stay on topic. We're looking at the last 2 weeks, specifically at that deployment that kind of failed. What do you guys think about that deployment? Let's dig in that space, all right? So don't get lost. Allow anonymity. If your team doesn't have psychological safety, which hopefully you've heard that phrase before, if you haven't, Google it. That means that people feel safe. They feel like they can share their topics. I'll tell you, if your team is sitting around doing this and you say, team, let's talk about this deployment. What happened? And the team just goes, nothing. It's okay. No problem. Your team is shut down for some reason. You need to explore and understand why that's happening. Very possibly they don't have psychological safety. What I do in that case is provide anonymity. Find a way for them to share, hey, we should talk about when that code blew up in production without having to say it in front of everyone. Give them anonymity. Now, don't give them anonymity just so that everyone's always anonymous. Hopefully your team matures where there's enough safety that they can have conversations out in the open. But maybe at the beginning, as you're developing that psychological safety, you want to create some anonymity to allow people to share how they really feel. There are some really interesting psychological experiments about people. There's one, and I forget the title of it, but I just recently came across this where they did a study about 30, 40 years ago where they put people in a room and they asked them compare this length of a line to 3 or 4 other lengths of line and tell us which one that's the same size as. It's a very simple task. You look at the line, you match it with A, B, C, or D. The only thing is there was only one participant and 4 actors. And what they did is the 4 actors said, oh, that's definitely B, definitely B, definitely B. And when it got to the real participant, they went, oh, definitely B, right? Until all the actors at the same time got it wrong, right? So the length was A, and they said C. And the next one said absolutely C. And the next one said absolutely C. And the last one said C. The real participant in the study, knowing it wasn't right, over 50% of the time would go with what the group was saying because they didn't want to upset the balance of power in the group. That's why sometimes we need anonymity. You need to give people the opportunity to say how they really think without everyone in the group going, what? That's not what we think, right? So maybe provide some anonymity there. And then create interesting and creative probes. So ask them questions, but don't just ask them broad, what do you want to talk about? Ask them creative probes about certain specific areas of the last retrospective. So focus on something. Focus on the team's communication. Focus on the office conditions. Focus on the tools the team uses. Focus and probe into those areas to help them pull out the things that they want to talk about. You want to look at intention versus reality. Remember, you're not just looking at what the team produced, but how did we think we were going to work? We thought those guys were going to get step one done, and then it was going to be easily handed off, and then these guys were going to help us, and then this was going to happen. Did that happen? Yes or no? If we're really good at predicting the future and what we planned actually happened, great. That's a great retrospective thing to discover. Most of the time, though, especially with new teams, you make a plan, here's how we're going to do it, and then something happens along the way and things get messed up. So intention versus reality. What happened that we didn't expect and what didn't happen that we did expect? Let's dig into those a bit. Have them put up sticky notes on the wall, right? And again, don't get in a rut. Don't get stuck with asking one question, one style of retrospective. Again, find those creative probes to ask them this. Down at the bottom, I've got 4 of the very common ones. You can Google these. These are incredibly common. Most people put up columns on a wall, put up columns in a tool. Mad, sad, glad. What made you mad this retrospective? Go put a sticky note on it. What made you sad this last retrospective or this last iteration? Go put a sticky note there. What made you glad? And so people would, sit down, they'd write on their little sticky notes, this made me sad, this made me glad, and they would go stick them up there. And just like with the one word before, you would ask the team, what do we see up here? Same thing for start, stop, continue. By the way, start, stop, continue is the greatest rut I see teams get into. They ask those three questions every retrospective. What do we need to start? What do we need to stop? What do we need to continue? Next retrospective, what do we start? What do we stop? What do we continue? Don't get stuck in that rut. What went well? What didn't go well? Or the three L's. I liked this, I learned that, and I loved this. Liked, learned, or liked. This last iteration lacked this. I liked this, and I learned this. These things all work remotely, although you need to be careful about anonymity. It's a little bit harder to create anonymity remotely than it is in person. In person, you can just have people, like I said, fill out a sticky note, sheet of paper, fold it in half or something, and then blind vote or blind submit their answers. A little bit harder online. There are some great tools out there that enable you to do anonymity online, but just be aware of your team's psychological safety and that it's a bit harder remotely unless you have access to a tool that allows that.